to the Mindset RX series of the Alpha Movement podcast. My name is Tom Foxley and I help functional athletes gain the champ's mindset. On today's show, I'm joined by Erling Kagge. And Erling, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. This is the way that I do it in Britain. Now, Erling is where to start? He was the first person to ever climb or to summit the 3 poles unassisted. And the 3 poles are the North, the South, and Everest. He is also a very successful entrepreneur. He runs his own publishing company. He is a Rolex model. He's a fantastic human being. But the reason that I got in contact with him was because of a book he wrote called Silence. Now, this was a gift from my girlfriend. Thank you very much, Harriet. And honestly, I was reading it whilst away on holiday, and it both summarised points that I'd been churning around in my head for such a long time but hadn't managed to condense. And on top of this, it managed to elucidate what I hadn't seen before. And it was such a beautiful book that I thought, you know what, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try and get Erling on the show. And he was gracious enough to accept it. And what comes out of this interview is a really nice insight into his book and into his work and into his personal philosophies. I think his book is a must for any functional athlete because it shows us the silence. It shows us the silence is important to what we're trying to gain. And so much of what we do as athletes is like more. You walk into a CrossFit box and it's like, I need to do more. I need to work harder. I need to add this extra thing on. Whereas the truth is, we need to listen to the silence, be more comfortable with the silence. And even when we're WODing, we need to get down to the silence underneath and remove the layers of bullshit. So here is Erling with what one of my favorite interviews, purely for the guest. Like he's crushed it, and I'm super happy to bring you Erling. So here is Erling.
Thank you, Tom.
No worries. I think it's like as I was just saying to you before, I really loved your book Silence, and to read it really condensed things. And I'm going to start this podcast off by saying to everyone listening, please get a copy because it's really beautifully written. It's fantastic. So I think where I'd like to start the actual interview though is just by going into a bit of your childhood and saying like where did the idea of exploration come to you?
I think or rather say, I would know that, we are all born explorers. I had 3 daughters and they all wanted to climb before they could walk. And I remember as a child, I had this kind of 360 degrees view into the horizon, and all doors were somehow open. But then you become 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, and expectations from your parents, from school, from friends, turns to take some of that spirit away. I think the spirit of exploration will never ever be taken totally away, but it's diluted by society. So I think, as I said, we're born to explore. We're born to be curious.
Okay, and then how did you get from having that influence come into your life and having the curiosity and the wonder as you speak about in the book? How did you have that stripped away, and then how did that come back in as well? Was there a particular turning point for you?
Yeah, I think for me, 26 years ago, I walked alone to the South Pole as the first in history in 50 days and nights under the midnight sun without a radio, and walking into this huge white nothingness. And after the days and weeks pass by, and somehow you feel that your body doesn't stop by your fingers, but it's extended into the nature, so all the surroundings become a part of you. And then eventually get this feeling that your brain is wider than the sky. And all this was about silence. Of course, silence surrounding me, but more importantly, silence within, the silence which is inside you all the time, but which is so easy to forget. So I think for me that was a turning point. When I was a kid, I thought about silence as being bored, as a situation where no one to play with, maybe been let down, sadness. But slowly it emerged to me that silence can also be your best friend.
Okay. And were you doing various forms of exploration throughout your childhood, or did it come in later in your life?
I did some minor trips in my teenagers, but I always had this dream about exploring the world, sailing the oceans, climbing the mountains, walking far away. And when I was 20 years old, together with some friends, we sailed across the Atlantic, and then we sailed back again. And then that somehow just kept on going, kept on exploring.
Wow. I love the way you just said, yeah, we just did this. It's a huge achievement. And then to move on to the 3 poles as well is fantastic. And it's just something to be hugely admired. But I think the interesting thing is that a lot of people have this in the background. Like, as you've said, the you can't get rid of the wonder and the curiosity and the search for silence. But why did it stay a permanent fixture of your life? And why did it become such a fundamental part of your life?
Because I think we're born as social beings. We're born to be together with other people and staying connected. So I think it's nothing wrong with technology. It's the way we relate to technology, which is a problem. And I experienced the same as most of the people, that I was more living through my devices, which means running away from yourself throughout the day. I was Googling something, I found what I was looking for, and 20 minutes later I was still Googling and checking the news 3 times in 1 hour, although I know nothing has happened. So I kind of felt that I was wasting my time. I was wasting my life. And when you live like that, as I have done, every now and then, you feel that life is very short. It moves on very fast. But if you turn around, and not all the time, but sometimes, to experience your own silence, then you get some variety in your life. And also you get to know yourself, which I think it's a fundamental thing.
I love the fact that you pointed out that we're running away from ourselves, and that's the avoidance of silence. And it's such a tough thing, as you said, like with technology coming through, to keep that presence. I think that's really important. On the subject of presence, and I think it's inexplicably linked as well with presence and silence and the side of philosophy as well. So whereabouts did philosophy come into your life?
I think, it's, I think it has been there since I was a boy, but at that time, of course, I couldn't spell philosophy. But this kind of thinking about different circumstances, kind of follow an idea or a thought, I think that's something deeply human. It's very much about curiosity. But then later in life, I started to read some philosophers, I started to study philosophy, and it became a part of my life. And I think it's, many philosophers are into analyzing languages and doing stuff which is quite irrelevant for most human beings. But I like this kind of philosophy which is about life. It's about living a better life. And that's the kind of philosophy I would like or I like to write about.
Okay. And where did those where did the influence come from in that? Something tells me that there's a strong Eastern philosophy like link, and like with the rise of Stoicism as well, like with or the re-rise of Stoicism. I think it's quite interesting to see what's coming through there. But were there any main influences through you, philosophically wise?
Yeah, I had this Norwegian philosopher called Arne Næss, who's unknown outside Norway, but he was an expert on Baruch Spinoza, the philosopher. And he became a major influence on me. We traveled together, we climbed together, we stayed up the mountains together. And his philosophy was very simple, although, I mean, if you took it seriously, it was very complicated. But it was like asked once in an interview by a paper, they asked him, how come you climb? Why do you climb? Arne's only reply was, why did you quit? So that was a philosophy very close to my heart.
Okay. And for you personally, do you remember any experiences where, and we can, if you want to, we can use your example of the South Pole, but do you remember any exact experiences where those principles that you'd learned or the philosophies that you'd learned, where they really transferred with immediate effect in your hardship?
Yes. One thing, for instance, as I'm now writing about in my next book on walking, is that there's no absolutes. So it's nothing comes down to zero and nothing goes up to 100. So everything is degrees between 0.1 and 99.9. And for me as an explorer, but also as a person who's today is in the office, 5 days a week, it's an interesting thought, because if I'm on an expedition, I always know I will never have 100% control. You will never have 100% control. You can have 50% to 60% to 99% control, but you will never have 100% control. And also the opposite. There's the chances for failure will never be 100% philosophical wise. Of course, I mean, practical wise, it could be 100%, but as an idea to keep in mind that it's always a possibility for a change. So that has been important in my life.
Nice. I love that. And I really, honestly, I should have started this interview with more of more like vivid imagery of what the climbing and the exploration and the expeditions have been like. Do you mind like just telling us a bit about what being alone in those kind of environments is like?
Yeah, it's somehow when you walk to the North Pole, the South Pole, or climbing Everest, or sailing across the Atlantic, you're very much alone. Although sometimes you know other people, you're still very much by yourself and responsible for your own well-being and your own life. But somehow you're not lonely as a problem. And walking to the South Pole, for instance, as I said, totally by myself, not communicating at all. Loneliness was not a problem. I think it's actually healthy to be by yourself for 50 days and nights, and not for the rest of your life, but for a while to not only to walk to the South Pole, but also to kind of move into yourself and discover your own mind. And as it says in the poem, that we are part of all that we are met. That's why I believe in variety. I believe in changes. I believe in challenges. And one thing I have learned from traveling a lot for the last 35 years is that most people I meet, they are underestimating themselves. Of course, some people are overestimating themselves, but most people are not. They're underestimating their own possibilities in life. So the people tell me or I tell them you should spend some time by yourself, maybe do a long hike, a few hours, maybe for a day, and they say it's impossible for me, and I say it's possible. We're somehow both right, I think.
Mm. It's really interesting to hear you talk about the getting away. Like right now, I'm sat in very close to central London, and looking out my windows, I must be able to see, if you could see through walls, a million people. But someone described it as one of the loneliest cities, because I think we spend so much time with our heads down. And I think that's, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems to be a very different type of silence to what you're suggesting we get involved with.
Yeah, but first of all, I agree. I felt much more lonely in a city like London or in big parties than I did walking alone to the South Pole, that's for sure. But also, the silence I found most interesting is the silence within. I spent many years of my life to search for totally silent places, and maybe it exists a place with absolute silence. But the problem, I haven't found it. But if you get to a silent place, you bring some noise with you, so then it's not silent anymore. So I eventually turned back to myself and start to explore the silence within, which I find much more interesting than the silence that sometimes is surrounding us.
Mm. So I think you mentioned the concept of almost like noisy silence, the fact that you can find silence with noise around, like turning up your music to become silent and to find that silence within you. Where do you think this, like, this is a bit of a tangent, but where do you think this overlaps with the idea of presence, or do you reckon they're two different concepts?
You have to ask me in a slightly different way. I didn't really get it.
Okay, so I believe that when we become present and in the moment, I think silence is, like, personally, I think silence is a pathway to that. But do you think there's more of an overlap or less of an overlap, or something I'm potentially missing, or more to it than that?
Yeah, I think that path to be present in your life is important. But I think, silence is about much more, because sometimes silence could just be about relaxation for 5 minutes, being, shutting out the world for those minutes, and then come back again. But it could also be something fundamental that is about getting to know yourself. And of course, that could be uncomfortable, it could be strange, it could be even frightening, or it could be also comfortable, interesting, and very enriching. And so in that sense, silence is about enjoying the pauses, finding back to things in life that brings you joy, and also about getting to know yourself, as I said, getting to know yourself.
Mm. When we discuss silence, and do you think that this is linked to the concept of minimalism? Because I'm just seeing how we can, like, transfer the concept of silence into a very actionable steps, or a series of actionable steps for people listening. Where would you start integrating silence into people's lives?
I think, it doesn't have to be, but I think quite often it would have to do with something about minimalism. But I think in terms of daily life and the inner silence, I think, I'll find inner silence when I wake up in the morning. If I lay in bed for another few minutes, I can find some inner silence. I find inner silence when I take the stairs instead of taking the lift. I find inner silence when I do the dishes, or if I'm cooking, when I have sex. then I find inner silence. And in Norway, we had this huge wave of people knitting, chopping wood, brewing beer. That's all about inner silence. It's all about shutting out the world for a few minutes or some hours and be present in your own life, getting to know yourself. So I think when people say it's so difficult to find this in the silence, I don't think so. I think it's quite simple. And the reason I wrote this book was also partly because I think meditation and mindfulness and yoga are all very good ideas, and I practice some of it myself. But I think on a daily basis, you shouldn't be dependent on techniques to experience this silence. This silence I'm writing about is there all the time.
That's beautiful. And one of the biggest ways that your book changed the way I viewed silence was I didn't really realize that when I was, for example, playing guitar or, for example, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, when I was doing that, or even listening to some like my music taste is Metallica and that kind of stuff, but that for me is my silence. That's the being, it's almost the forced reflectiveness. So that's a big thing for people to take.
Yeah, I think that's a very good observation, because this inner silence, as I said, it can quite often have to do with something with music, that you just turn up your Metallica and then you shut out all other noise in the world, and it's no other disturbances, it's no other expectations, it's you and the music, and that's about silence. I totally agree. I think you can even sit at the end of Heathrow Airport on the end of the runway, and still experience silence. I mean, it's a bit complicated, but you can still do it.
That's I really like. You can tell I'm infatuated with the concept, and just to give you a bit of a briefing as well. The people who'll be listening to this podcast are mostly athletes who compete in CrossFit, and so it's a very competitive and frantic paced sport. But then they're essentially going through very intense physical hardship at a time, shorter than obviously what you did, but I think it'd be useful to say how you, if you're encountering hardship, come back to that silence, or whether you find a way, or even if you find that useful.
Yeah, I think I think my experience is to go through hardship, it's good with silence. Like when you climbed Mount Everest, for instance, it's so many good reasons to swear, to be angry, to be mad, to have, make a ugly face, say ugly words, but all this just drags you down. So on expeditions, I hardly ever say a negative word. And walking to the South Pole alone, I actually didn't say a word at all for those 50 days. I kept my mouth shut, and I tried to, it's. I'm not. One thing is not to say anything negative, or swearing, but I didn't even think about it. And I think that's important, because if you manage to somehow, breathe properly and maybe even smile through hardship, you don't suffer that much.
I really like that. What was the last, or what was the first time that you spoke to someone like after 50 days of silence?
I came to the South Pole, where the Americans had built a base at 90 degrees south, and because I didn't have radio, they didn't expect me. It's like, I walked in towards the pole. Some Yankees came out from the base and to greet me and said, "How do you do?" Just like I should have met them on the street in New York. And I replied, like a pig in shit, because obviously I had the same underwear on for those 50 days and nights, not taking it off once. So it was strange, and I'm a very social guy back home in Norway, but I didn't miss to talk to people. I missed someone to lay close to, some skin to skin contact. That's the kind of things you're missing. But to actually to talk to someone, I didn't miss.
I think that's a really nice place to wind up. But how would you actually, if you got time, I'd like to ask one last question.
Yeah, please.
How do you personally find silence in day-to-day life?
Some days I feel too busy and too important that I have to be connected at all times. Because I have this today, I'm a publisher, but I'm mistaken. I'm not that important, and I think I get less effective when I live like that. So on other days, when I enter my office, if I have too much noise in my head, then I walk the stairs instead of taking the lift. And if that doesn't work, I try to walk the stairs backwards, because then I have to concentrate. I have to concentrate on each step. And then I somehow, for a few minutes, empties my head of all this noise. And I have some silence during those steps.
Well, Erling, thank you so much for your time. I really can't tell you how much I appreciate your wisdom.
No, that's great, Tom. I'm happy. Although it's not that many words in the book, I spent a year and a half writing them. So I didn't see that people should read. So many people should read the book and find something special. So I feel very privileged.
I think the lack of hundreds, thousands of words is a benefit. I think it's beautifully elegant. So thank you for writing such a wonderful piece.
Thank you, Tom. All the best.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Alpha Movement podcast. My name is Tom Foxley, and you can find me on the socials on Instagram, which is @TomFoxley, or you can find me on Facebook, which is facebook.com/tom.foxley, or you can follow the Alpha Movement at facebook.com/Alpha Movement Official. Now, for those of you who are aware of my coaching services, now is the time that I'm going to drop you a line about my Inner Athlete Performance Camps. I'm starting the next one on the 29th of January, and right now I have 2 spots left, as 2 people have just had to postpone their start. So I'm looking for 2 people to take on the next Inner Athlete Performance Camp. At the time of recording, you have a week. So go. Shoot me a message through socials, or shoot me a message through tom@alphamovement.co, and we'll have a chat about it. The 12-week course is essentially a way to build out the fundamentals and mindset for any functional athlete. And if you want to find out a bit more about what that means for you, shoot me a message and we'll start from there. If not, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave a 5-star review. It all helps reach new people, and I'll see you guys very, very soon.